Hello, it's a pleasure to be at the National Air event and to present to you EU Clean Air policy. I was actually involved in one of the previous events and it was a pleasure back then. And I hope that today's updates on what we've done will be a source of interest for the discussions you'll be having over the 2 days of the conference. What I would like to do is start with the European Green Deal, which is the overall policy architecture that we've got in Europe and that has been guiding us in devising the direction of clean air policy. And in particular, in the European Green Deal, there is a specific commitment to the fact that the Commission will propose to revise air quality standards to align them more closely with the World Health Organization recommendations. And I'll say more about this during the course of the presentation. But let's turn to the state of EU clean air policy today. And I'll take two pollutants to illustrate this. The first one is particulate matter that is often linked to combustion, including, of course, heating and transport. And you can see on the left-hand side that the redder the map gets, the worse it is. So in that sense, Ireland is certainly doing better than a number of EU member states, but it's not to say that everything is perfect in Ireland. And as we know, and as will be discussed, there are challenges that still need to be addressed. But we can see that the heart of the problem is mainly in Eastern Europe and in Northern Italy. And this translates into deaths that are attributable to environmental health causes per country. And you can see here that if we look at this per country, Ireland is actually affected, as are a number of other member states. Let's turn now briefly to nitrogen dioxide, NO2. And there again, the same principle applies. The redder the dots are, the worse the situation is. And as you can see, this is something that is widespread. NO2 is, of course, linked in the first place to traffic and therefore affecting a number of cities in Europe, over 100 cities. And there you can see that Ireland is no immune from the problem. And in Dublin, for instance, there are problems that are linked to nitrogen dioxide. So this is to say that the problems are widespread in Europe and that air pollution is a challenge for us all. If we look at the response from the EU perspective, we have three main clusters of action. The first one is to set maximum concentration levels of air polluting substances through the ambient air quality directives. This is what I will mainly speak about today. Then we also look at the national emission levels for 5 pollutants. That is the so-called National Emission Reduction Commitments Directive. And I'll also say a few words about that directive. Last but not least, we look at source-specific emission standards from energy to industry to transport so that we can address the origin of pollution. We've noticed over the past decades that EU clean air policy works. You can see through this graph that since 2000, we've seen the EU urban population exposed to air pollution above EU standards decrease consistently over the period. But at the same time, we still see that our population is exposed to air pollution above EU standards for some of the pollution, some of the pollutants that we tackle. That is the case for PM10, as you can see, for instance, but it even gets worse if we look at the WHO guidelines, and those are the guidelines from 2005, which have been recently updated, and I'll come to that in a second to illustrate the magnitude of the challenge that remains to be addressed. When it comes to pollutants that we tackle through the emissions directive, so the NEC directive, we've set up a number of reduction commitments, and you can see them on the slide. And how those are translated into policies at national level is what we're looking at now. And I won't go into the details for Ireland, but you can see on this slide that the main message would be that Ireland will need to put in place a number of new measures to reduce ammonia, nitrogen oxides, and non-methane volatile organic compounds pollution over the time period ahead of us in order to be able to address its commitments under the directive. And that needs to be done in a way that, of course, integrates priorities linked to climate and agriculture in order to be effective. Moving back to ambient air quality, we carried out in 2019 an overall assessment, we call that a fitness check, that looked at the overall effectiveness of the legislation. And as you can see on this slide, we've noted that a number of aspects of our work needed to be improved. And that is what we've engaged in, trying to address the shortcomings that we identified. And I will very briefly go through the 5 key shortcomings that we looked at, which, as you will see, are common to a number of member states and also applicable to Ireland to some respect. I'm sorry. When it comes to shortcomings, the first one is about health. And this is clearly linked to the fact that our standards are not aligned with the latest scientific advice. And that scientific advice, as I said, has evolved recently as the WHO has revised its own standards, and I'll come to that. But our challenges are also linked to implementation. Still today, we have 31 cases of infringements in the European Union, which is far too high. And that, for instance, leads to 15 for particulate matter or 13 for nitrogen dioxide. And that clearly is not satisfactory as things stand. We also have governance shortcomings because the local and air quality measures linked to that are impacted by a number of other factors that need to be responded to if we are to be effective. But some measures that are taken are not always effective and are not always proportionate. So this is something that also needs to be looked into for us to be more effective. We also have an assessment shortcoming. While we do have 4,000 air quality monitoring stations across the EU that deliver robust data, we still see that there are flexibilities in that assessment framework that sometimes impact the comparability of data. So this is something that we, again, need to look at and improve. Last but not least, we have air quality information shortcomings. While the information that we have about air quality is widely available, we often have it in real time, and this is something that we can be very proud of and that member states have done a lot of work on over the past decades that certainly needs to be commended. At the same time, regretfully, we still have 54% of the EU population that believe that they're not well informed about air quality problems. Clearly, this is not satisfactory. We need to address this. We need to make people more informed and aware about the challenges faced in terms of air pollution in Europe. And that is what we've been giving all our attention to over the past months, because what those shortcomings lead to is a number of environment and health challenges, as you can see apply now on the slide. So from health impacts to ecosystem impacts to connections to climate change, but they also lead to economic issues, which are now displayed on the slide, including 20 billion euro of direct costs linked to healthcare, linked to air pollution, as well as social impacts, because we have also observed a number of inequalities and social sustainability linked to air pollution. Basically, the lower your economic status is, the more likely it is that you'll be more affected by pollution. And last but not least, we also have more policy-related challenges that we need to address, including when it comes to synergies with EU policies or reducing administrative burdens. So this is what we've been doing in developing the new policies ahead, and that needs to be underpinned by an impact assessment so that we assess the overall dimensions, socially, economically, environmentally, of the policies that we've been developing and that we could adjust to make them better. And in doing so, I will not go into the details of this slide, but what it highlights is that we're looking at all the problems, the shortcomings that I've identified earlier on, and we're looking at how we can basically address those in an effective fashion. And you can see on the slide that this boils down at the very right to 3 policy interventions as we define them. We need to look first and foremost, we need to look at the EU standards themselves. We then need to look at the legislative framework to make it more effective. And we finally need to look at improving monitoring, modeling, and plans that are to be developed to address air pollution. And that's what we have been doing. But what I would like to illustrate is the question of ambition. Ambition is something that has been raised in the context of the adoption by the World Health Organization of new guidelines for air pollution that were for air quality that were adopted in September, so just 2 months ago. And what you can see here is that the highest level of ambition would, of course, be for us to align fully with the ambient air quality guidelines of the WHO. But you can see a full range of ambitions that are linked to what the WHO defines as interim targets, 1 to 4. And this is to illustrate the discussions that we're having about what it is to be ambitious and what it is to consider closer alignment with the WHO. And let's take a look now at how the EU fares compared to the WHO latest recommendations. As you can see here, we are basically on the right-hand side, the EU standard. But you can see that this compares either favorably or not with the new WHO guidelines. For instance, when it comes to the current standard that we have for PM2.5, which is at 25 micrograms per cubic meter, we are at the level of the interim target 2, that is the red star at the top. And you can see that delineated for various pollutants. And that gives us an idea about the ambition that we need to consider. The arrows that now appear relate to recommendations for which we do not have anything at EU level now. So we would need to consider that as part of our degree of alignment with the WHO. So this again illustrates that we need to look at various levels of ambition and how those translate into the realities of what Europe faces in terms of challenges today. And that is what I want to illustrate with this slide here. You can see here the range of the highest to lowest recorded monitored concentration levels per member state as part of what is submitted to the European Environment Agency. And you can see that there are very few member states that would be at the guideline level, which appears with the green arrow at the bottom, guideline. You can see that Ireland is one of the better performing member states there, but would not be, as things stand, at the level of the guidelines yet. So that means that we need to look at different scenarios of ambition depending on the level of alignment that one considers. And you can see an illustration on this slide. I will not go into the details of this now because this is analysis that we're carrying out as we speak, really, and that will be further developed in the months to come to underpin the social, economic, and environmental impacts of the various levels of ambition that one can consider. But what I would like to highlight now is that we are in the process of consulting member states and all relevant stakeholders about the new policies that we are to develop. On the 23rd of September, we had the launch of a 12-week-long online public consultation, whereby we invited all stakeholders to reply to questionnaires linked to the levels of ambition that we can consider, for instance, until the 16th of December of this year. So we would certainly want to invite all Irish stakeholders to take part in those discussions and contribute to the consultations that we will take into account in deciding, in considering, in deciding about the levels of ambition that we need to align with in terms of the WHO recommendations, for instance, but about all other aspects of our work that will also need to be taken into account. We had a stakeholder consultation meeting on the 23rd of September. A number of Irish stakeholders were involved, to which we're grateful. And what we saw at that meeting was the number of stakeholders disagreed on the level and timing of more closely alignment with the WHO recommendations, in particular NGOs versus national authorities, NGOs pushing for full alignment and a number of other authorities saying, well, full alignment is something that will need to be considered carefully based on its economic, social, and environmental impacts because of feasibility factors, because of a number of considerations that they would like to bring to the fore. Several stakeholders also stressed the merits of introducing additional standards that are based on a relative reduction of the exposure of the population, in addition to looking at hotspot concentration levels, which is an interesting dimension to the discussion that we'll have to consider as well. Now, let me turn very briefly to the timeline and next steps. We are in the middle of the process, as I identified at the beginning of the presentation, we started in 2019 when we adopted the evaluation of the current legislation, the so-called fitness check. Now, this is the second half of 2021, and we had a number of milestones that helped us guide the further work. In particular, the release of the guidelines by the World Health Organization in September, the first public consultation meeting that I mentioned, as well as the newest air quality briefing by the European Environment Agency, providing the latest picture on air pollution and levels of air quality in Europe. But we will also be hosting very, very soon the third EU Clean Air Forum. It will take place on the 18th and 19th of November in Madrid, Spain. It will be the third such forum. The first two took place respectively in 2017 in Paris and 2019 in Bratislava, Slovakia. And we will use the forum as a key breakthrough in discussing the future directions of our policies and listening to various stakeholders about the direction taken. So I hope that as many Irish stakeholders as possible will be able to join us in Madrid, either on site or remotely. The event will be live streamed, of course, so that you can take part in the discussions on the future of clean air policy in Europe. And we will then turn in 2022 to the finalization of our work, which will lead by the second half of 2022 to the adoption of new proposed EU legislation on ambient air quality. Thank you very much for your attention. I very much look forward to interacting with stakeholders from Ireland over the coming period towards the revision of our clean air rules at EU level. And we certainly will want to learn from the Irish experience in tackling the legislation that has been applicable so far to see what lessons we can draw on an EU-wide basis to further improve our policies, but last but not least, to provide cleaner air for all of our citizens, because this is really what this is all about. And your conference is a key opportunity to do so, to discuss with stakeholders, to review the relevance of policies in Ireland and beyond, so that we can all deliver in the interest of our citizens and their health. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to engaging with the audience in Q&A sessions at a later stage. Thank you.